Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about Parmel Sector, located in 15th Hook Nebula Command of the Outer Rim. It wouldn't be the trailing sectors without at least a little bit of organized crime, which today is brought to us by the planet Callistas, a mining world where they dig up nuclear reactive material and pirates like to hide out in the mine shafts left behind. You can't be executed by the authorities if you've already died of cancer. Parmel Sector is a pretty bog-standard Republic sector that's mostly notable for how much it sticks out in this desolate stretch of the galaxy for reaching the level of unexceptional. The most notable planet here is Revkin 5, which is famous for its megalopolises, but don't be confused. If you look at a list of city designations, then Megalopolis is right below Ecumenopolis, and that can trick people into thinking that a planet with multiple megalopolises is well on its way to becoming an Ecumenopolis, but the gap between Megalopolis and Ecumenopolis is vast. The exact definition of megalopolis varies, but the easy one is any continuous urban area with at least 10 million people. My home planet has a population of about 8 billion, a surface area that is about 3% covered in urban areas, and a total of 45 different cities with a population of 10 million or more. We are bigger than average even amongst major worlds, but not by a lot. When records say Revkin 5 is known for having lots of megalopolises, it might be that they're a pretty standard major world with a population of 5 or 6 billion, which means they have a few dozen megalopolises, and for this region of space, that's a ton. I haven't gone into it because exhaustive lists of planetary population figures are 1, boring, and 2, frequently unavailable anyway, but a lot of the sector capitals in the trailing sectors have a population of just a few hundred million people. That's closer to the population of Tatooine than it is to the population of Naboo. So when records say that the Imperials had trouble chasing down rebel cells in the many megalopolises of Revkin 5, in context, that might just mean that Revkin 5 was one of the only planets in this entire oversector to have more than one megalopolis on it. That mission of chasing down the rebels was given to a mercenary company called Churhis Riflemen, who had their headquarters on Turkan 3, a minor planet also located in Parmel Sector. Churhis Riflemen would later end up nearly wiped out by the rebels after being promised artillery support from the Imperial Army, and then abandoned. When Churhis Riflemen reconstituted themselves, they started taking contracts from the rebels, partly because it was the mid-rim offensive and the rebels had more resources to throw around than they had before, but also because Churhis Riflemen wanted revenge for being told they were to hold the line until Imperial artillery support and reinforcements arrived, when actually they were being sacrificed as a stalling action while Imperial forces retreated. Churhis Riflemen would later engage Imperial Army units on Gosho 4, and while they got the worst of it early on, they were able to rally after improvising man-sized tractor beam traps to catch incoming grenades and hurl them away. They couldn't reliably return them to sender, but they could reliably toss them away from Churhis' position, which was good enough, and pretty good considering it was wonky experimental tech that usually didn't work for its intended purpose, let alone the jank that Churhis Riflemen wound up using it for. The Imperials generally lost a lot of battles out here, although Turak 4 was spun as a victory because of how much damage was inflicted on the rebels in the process of losing the planet. It's hard to know how much of that is Imperial cope and how much of it is recognition that the Empire could win a war of attrition with the rebels, as long as they could keep the rebels from mobilizing too many planets. The rebel theory of victory in the mid-rim offensive was that most of the galactic population was on their side, but the Imperial theory of victory is that most of those would-be rebels were armed with blaster pistols, or, in many cases, not but a defiant spark in the eyes, both of which would prove to be no match for AT-ATs during the mid-rim retreat. The rebels had more troops to spare in theory, but the Imperials had more on the actual battlefield, which is why the Imperials counted Turak 4 as a success, because the rebels did lose a lot of people while taking the planet. On the other hand, the rebels did capture Turak 4, and it was because the Imperials sent a bunch of tanks into the volcanic Hitak Mountains, where rebel ambush units with Plex missile launchers ripped them apart. Imperial repulsor lift tanks are generally pretty agile and good at dealing with Plex missiles, but firstly, this wasn't the 2M Saber fighter tank or one of its predecessors, this was the much clumsier 1H repulsor tank, a clown shoes knockoff that you don't hear very much of because they failed in practically every battle they were used in. And second, the mountainous terrain made strafing impossible even if they had been using proper fighter tanks. The Legion deployed to Turak 4 was commanded by Colonel Zell Johans, and the losses taken there prevented them from participating in the attack on Hoth several years later. Colonel Johans complained that if his 1H repulsor tanks had been prioritized over Colonel Veer's AT-ATs, his reconstituted unit could have taken Echo Base faster and cut off the rebel retreat. I broadly think the mid-rim offensive was defeated by the speed and firepower of the 2M Sabre tank, not the looming silhouette of the AT-AT and its fear-based combat doctrine, but if I'm an Imperial commander on Hoth, I would much rather have the best walker than the worst tank.